Today our guest is Meinl Cymbals artist John Longstreth. John is well known and widely respected as one of the world's best death metal drummers, having spent time as the drummer for Cannibal Corpse, Hate Eternal, Origin, and others. The sheer physical nature of his abilities behind the drum set is astounding, and to many seems downright impossible. I would wager to bet that if you asked John what the secret to his facility is, he would simply say, practice. The funny part is that is not a question that I asked John during our conversation for this podcast. But I would add to my imagined answer of his that he's more in tune with the concept of economy of motion than most drummers are. To me, he's the drumming answer to Bruce Lee's one-inch punch. But yeah, his abilities are on another level. But behind the physical aspect of what John does is a deep understanding of the musicality that lies within death metal. Some may scoff at that statement, but I don't really have time for naysayers of the genre. There's a lot going on. You just have to be open-minded enough to hear and understand. John's understanding comes from the fact that he's basically given his life to death metal drumming. He's done more tours than most people, and all for the sake of playing super complex and brutal death metal for audiences that are about as devoted as an audience can be. Death metal may not have the numbers that a band like the Foo Fighters has, or that Taylor Swift has, as far as fans go, but they're every bit as devoted as those artists' fans are, if not way more so. That rabid fan base is what's allowed John to make a career out of a very niche genre. I sat down to chat with John by phone very recently about all kinds of things. I really wanted to know his past, and his pathway to where he currently is in life. Coming from a family where his dad was a jazz musician in Kansas City, I found his arrival within the world of death metal an intriguing one. John's also been an intense practitioner of Jiu Jitsu until recently. Nowadays, he also spends his time at the Collective in New York City, where he's part of the staff. We produced a series of videos with John last year that are now all on our Meinl Cymbals YouTube channel. John came in and calmly laid waste to his drum set and barely broke a sweat in the process. Even if you're not a fan of death metal drumming, they're worth checking out. Enjoy the podcast. So I'd like to welcome everybody into the Meinl Podcast. Today we've got the Master Blaster, the Major Rager, the man whose calves are bigger than my head, John Longstreth. What's up, dude?
Have you ever played Blaster Master?
I've not played Blaster Master, but I called you the Master Blaster. I think I got that off some kind of like waffle or pancake stuff, like mix that's in a can that you can like spray out like whipped cream.
Well, we're close to the same age, right?
Yeah, I'm 40. I'm 46. How old are you?
I'm 44. So you grew up with Nintendo.
I did.
With the original 8-bit Nintendo. Anybody out there, Blaster Master was a killer game, and it was so hard. But anyway, thanks for having me. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. I got to tell you though, dude, I don't remember Blaster Master, but I'm like the weirdo that never really got too hardcore into video games because I realized I would become quickly addicted, so I just like got up and walked away from it, which is odd.
Proud video game addict to this day. I am splitting my time practicing on my pad kit and beating myself up on Sekiro. So, it was actually video games that led me to a more healthy physical life in martial arts. So,
okay, that's cool.
I got good and bad, and it's important that you appreciate both of them for what they're worth.
We'll get to that martial arts question in a bit because I've got one about that. But I think you should get a T-shirt made that says "Proud Video Game Addict."
It could be one of those Target, like, never underestimate a guy that's proud to play video games and drives a truck and votes this way and has a MacBook computer and likes bowling.
Right.
If you've seen those.
I've not, but I like it. Dude, so I've got a few questions for you just to spur a little bit of dialogue here. So I'm going to jump into some things that my first questions are going to touch on some topics that will help people who may not have heard of you or your body of work and who are listening. What was your first love musically speaking?
My dad. And so that
he was a jazz
count.
musician, right?
Yeah, my dad was a jazz musician. His name was Russ Long. He was a pianist. And he turned me on to, I'm pretty sure the first one was Buddy Rich, but right around Buddy Rich came Frank Zappa and Steely Dan and Miles Davis. So he would, you've seen it on TV shows. I was actually just watching it on Stranger Things the other day when the older brother is playing the punk band for his younger brother. It was like, wow, I didn't have a brother to do that, but my dad would set me down in front of the record player, put a record on, put the headphones on my head. And for me, it was, how could you ask for a better musical upbringing? For him, I think if you ask my mom, he was probably just shirking his parent duties. But yeah, from a very early age, from before I can remember, I had Buddy Rich, Frank Zappa, Steely Dan. Steely Dan was the rock band for all the jazz musicians. And then on top of that, or next to that rather, since my mom was a nurse, she was gone from the house most of the time, so he would have band practice in the living room with all of his musicians. So not only was I hearing the stuff, I was also witnessing it go down. So that's I don't know, a bit of a tangent there, I think.
No. That would be your first love in terms of like getting you to love music. It made a big impression on you.
Right.
Now, I need to ask, because I couldn't tell about the tense, past or present. Is your dad still living?
No, I'm afraid he's not. He died New Year's Eve morning of 2007.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, it sucks, but that's what happens, so don't worry about that.
Well, what was the moment that made you say you want to play the drums?
I don't really know. Oh, well, because like I had he got me a drum set when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I think. I remember them picking me up from kindergarten, and there was a drum set in the back of the car. But I didn't do anything with that drum set for a long time until somewhere in the right before junior high, I think I discovered Alex Van Halen. And I think that's what really brought me into, wow, that sounds pretty cool. Let's try doing that. Because for a minute I was fiddling around with guitar as well. So I have to owe the Van Halen brothers was what got me away from my parents' music and got me listening to my own stuff.
Now, did you discover Van Halen on MTV or on the radio?
My sister got me 1984 on cassette for my birthday. I don't remember why.
So she was like your older brother?
She was my older brother. She's my half-sister. And, hello, Jenny, if you're listening. You better be listening. But, yeah, she was the person in my life that would go, this is cool, listen to this. And I would sit on her floor in her bedroom, and she did me quite the disservice by sacrificing me to the ultimate white witch, which was Stevie Nicks. Oh my God. And when I saw Stevie Nicks on MTV, I was like, who is that person? She's going to take things from me. And I'm sorry. But yeah, so she was my kind of accessible adult that was, she took me ice skating and kind of ran me around and did all these cool things with me and showed me what cool music was. And I don't remember how we got to Van Halen. I don't remember how we got to her getting me that tape, but I must have heard it.
She just knew that it was a rad album and she got it for you because that was what being a good sibling was all about.
That was a rad album, and that was when it came out, too.
It's still a great album.
It's still one of the best records ever.
Now, okay, fast forward just a little bit. What was the moment that made you say that you wanted to play blast beats?
I kind of fell into it. I had a friend named Scott who was showing me a lot of death metal, but he was showing me really difficult forms of death metal to latch onto as a kid for my age. I was not an aggressive person. I did not grow up in an aggressive town. And I was into Iron Maiden and Van Halen and all these bands. And he was playing Napalm Death and Benediction and Carcass and Deicide. He was playing those three, and but it was like old Napalm Death. So it was Napalm Death Scum. It was Peel Sessions Carcass. It was Legion by Deicide. So we're talking about very polarizing extreme versions of these bands, and not necessarily listenable versions. I couldn't tell what was going on. It just sounded like noise. So he had a what is it? He had a compilation tape called At Death's Door Part 2. And in that compilation tape was a song from a band called Cynic. The song was called Euphoric Forms, and it was from their 1991 demo. And that song came on, and it was, the production was crisp. They were playing like motherfuckers, man. Like, you could hear the bass player. The bass player was doing all this slapping and popping and all these really killer bass lines that went against the guitar, and that was Tony Choi. And the drummer, as you know, was Sean Rennert. And that band allowed me to approach, because I could hear what was being played, and I could hear that it was amazing. So from that point, I was able to go back and listen to different Carcass records, and I was able to listen to Death at this point, and then Atheist, and Fear Factory factors in. Fear Factory factors in. And that is, I was already playing drums. I was already playing along to Iron Maiden records and Van Halen records, but at this point in time, I was like, ooh, so this is what a blast beat is. And so I started playing around with that, and I got into a local band and started messing around with that. And that's kind of how like I said, I kind of fell into it. It was still really new at that point in time. So I have to say that it was Sean Rennert that made me want to play blast beats, even though he never played blast beats. But he did get me into that kind of music.
Do you think that, Cynic, those guys were such incredible musicians. Do you think that hearing them, that kind of musicianship in a heavy format, is what maybe sort of spoke to that Steely Dan sort of thing that your dad embedded in you? And so, because those guys were incredible musicians, and it sort of made dudes that were into rock able to listen to really jazz-minded, fusion, progressive-minded musicians. Do you kind of see where I'm going, the train of thought I have here?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what it did. I think, because I grew up listening to all the jazz and all the fusion, so that just, like, my brain was already primed for that kind of music. My brain wasn't primed yet for a wall of noise. And my brain didn't necessarily identify with the aggression yet. So yeah, when Cynic popped out, and this was still just their demo. So yeah, that's exactly what that did. And and when they were coming out, they were citing Mahavishnu Orchestra, and they were all these prog bands and all that stuff. So it was really cool. Yeah.
Well, now, the fact that you were from Kansas City, which is a pretty historical town as far as jazz music is concerned. These days, people don't think of it that way, but along the jazz trail, you had towns like New Orleans and St. Louis and Kansas City and then New York. But nowadays, people don't really consider, in a mainstream sense, St. Louis or Kansas City. Just a couple of random questions. Does that town have anything to do with your dad being a jazz musician, or did he just randomly, was it kind of two separate things? And then also, how did you not end up being a jazz musician? Was it just sort of a natural, polite rebelling against your parents' music?
He was an absolute rebel against my parents' music. They had to put up with all the basic stuff. I say the only thing my parents did not have to put up with was drugs, alcohol, and crime on my part. My dad did have to bail me out once for being arrested for driving on a suspended license, but that was it. I got to a point where jazz wasn't that interesting. Rock music was interesting. MTV was interesting because I could look at it because my sister was cool and all that stuff. So that's just like any kid, I think, that grew up in the 80s. So, and like multiple times my dad would wasn't that he wasn't that supportive of me being a musician because my mom was a nurse and she had the career and she was the breadwinner. And he was a jazz musician, and a lot of the dark things that come with being a jazz musician he had and disliked about himself and didn't want to breed that into me. So my dad was definitely trying to breed up, and he wanted me to follow a path more akin to what my mom was doing. But so that created a bit of a rift, but every now and then he would kind of come back around and say, come out to this gig with me, and I'll show you how to do this, and I'll show you how to do that. But I kind of wasn't having it because at that point in time I was already approaching thrash metal and death metal. And in approaching thrash metal and death metal in your teens brings a specific mentality, as I'm sure you get. But yeah, so that's where the rebellion comes in. And it was never, no dad, fuck you, or no dad, jazz is stupid. It was always, that's cool, but I'm going to go downstairs and work on blast beats instead. I wish I would have taken him up. That's like, anybody that says they don't have any regrets, that's just kind of an asshole thing to say, I think. But I have that regret because there were so many things I could have learned. I mean, I learned a lot, but I could have learned so much more. And nowadays, now that I am a somewhat successful death metal drummer of 20 years, I am now actually working on kind of doubling back and being a jazz musician. I actually have a guy I'm working with. His name is Vaughn, and we're taking baby steps towards doing that. I actually played my first jazz gig last January. I think it was January. But Kansas City, to get back to that, yeah, I mean, he was born and raised in Kansas City, so was my mom. And, he went to school to, and eventually, yeah, I think he just fell into it. I know he ended up meeting a lot of the guys. I mean, Charlie Parker was from Kansas City. So I'm crossed paths with that guy probably a couple of times. He used to, he hired Pat Metheny at 17 when Pat Metheny was 17. So I don't know how he connected. I'm sure it's just because he grew up in Kansas City and was a piano player, was a musician. But he actually started as a guitar player and moved over to piano eventually when somebody couldn't or wouldn't. So he became a piano player. And he was like a musician, guitar player, sort of piano player up until somewhere, I think, in the 80s where he'd actually decided, okay, I'm a piano player.
So what did your dad think of death metal?
Nah, didn't want it. Don't want to hear it. The only connection to popular music he had was Primus, because he loved the bass playing and he loved he loved the guitar playing in Primus. He goes, I love that flat fifth. What is going on there? That is insane. But yeah, if I played any heavy metal around him, he just interpreted it as a noisy wall of sound and get that away from me. It's stupid.
Did you ever, the fact that he liked Larry Lalonde's guitar playing in Primus, did you ever end up playing any Possessed for him and go, hey, that's the same guy?
No, because at that point in time, I didn't know Larry was part of Possessed. How's that?
That's funny.
But I remember he heard an Iron Maiden song one day, and he just couldn't stand Bruce Dickinson. He's like, what is that guy wailing about? Give me a break.
It's kind of funny, man. I mean, the last Maiden show that I went to, and I grew up a diehard Maiden fan. I mean, come on. I love old school Maiden. And I went to the last show, one of the last shows they did here in Nashville. And at one point they were playing one of their newer songs. And man, God bless them for still writing new material that they get excited about and that they want to play live. The message from me to them is nobody fucking wants to hear that stuff. But it's okay because they're digging it and it makes them feel alive. Good for them. My point is that when I heard Bruce singing the newer stuff, I was like, oh my God. It was just so over the top dramatic kind of. So I imagine your dad hearing Maiden as an adult, he probably was just like, yeah, that's just too much drama. It's just too much.
Well, what do a lot of these? What does a lot of younger bands sound like to anybody that's a full-grown adult? I guess.
Oh, well, I think about that all the time. I mean, I think about the fact that when I was a kid, I loved Wasp. I fucking loved Wasp. Do you remember Wasp?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I remember Wasp.
I mean, I loved them. They were like the second coming of Kiss from the 70s. Like, they were great. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. My older brother gave me merciless grief about liking Wasp. And if I'd heard Wasp nowadays for the first time... Go ahead. Yeah. I mean, dude, if I'd heard Wasp for the first time nowadays, I would be laughing at it. But yeah, I mean, it's all what you dig as a kid. So another question. You once toured with a Christian death metal band, right? They were called Possession?
Did tour with them. I was in that band for a minute, for a little bit between Angel Corpse and Origin. And
what was that like?
What's that?
What was it like? What was that experience like?
Well, it wasn't really a Christian death metal band. It was the vocalist had the vocalist. I don't know what his role is, but I know that he works heavily in the church, and I know that he's a believer. And the band was interesting. It was like I said, it's a local band from it's a band from KC called Possession, and they had put out a demo, and I just went to a show as a teenager, and I saw this band, and it blew my mind. I had never seen anything that crazy. It was like really aggressive King Diamond. So if King Diamond employed all of the shrilly high stuff, but then also put in a lot more death metal vocal, stuff. And then it was just this killer band that I actually ended up joining. The interesting thing is one of the guitar players only had one arm. And that was a guy named Shane. He had lost his, let me see here. He had lost his fretting hand. So he lost his left hand in a punch press accident. He was already a right-handed guitar player at that point. So he lost his hand in a punch press accident. And after about 6 months of dealing with only having one arm, he strung his guitar backwards and flipped it over, and he started using his once picking hand to just fret. And he would use like a volume pedal and a cutoff switch, and he would like slam this bar chord down and then turn on the channel, and it was really crazy sounding. A lot of his guitar playing sounded kind of backwards and drunk. And that band, I was in there, I recorded one song with them, did one show with them. It was really just something to keep me busy, because after Angel Corpse, I was pretty much convinced that I would never play in another death metal band again, because the way that went down, because it went down in such a manner that it took a good solid year before I really started approaching death metal seriously again with Origin. So as far as what was that like being in a Christian metal band, it didn't feel like anything, because I was in Kansas. I was 21 years old, and I was still like, it was just normal. Like, there's nothing. You grow up, you live your entire life in the Midwest, and your chances are you're not going to bat an eye at any of that. You're not even going to really think much about it. But and then it became a problem between one of the guitar players and the vocalists. So I was having these conversations with the guitar player. We're not a Christian metal band, damn it. And with the vocalist, he's like, well, just because I'm Christian and I talk about Christian topics doesn't mean we have to be a Christian metal band, but we are kind of playing Christian metal. I was like, ugh. And that band basically fell apart right around the time I went to join Origin anyhow. So, and every now and then I hear from the vocalist, and he's still kind of doing the same thing. But I don't know, that there wasn't really enough of that time to really pull from it. It was just kind of strange.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only reason I really asked was because it just almost seems like, not that I feel like death metal has to have any strict guidelines on what the topics are in the lyrics, but usually it's not going to be of that kind of a nature, so it just seemed somewhat interesting to me. That's why I asked. Now, with Origin that you mentioned, you joined those guys in what, 1999?
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy. I probably started talking to him. Yeah, it must have been 99, because it was summer or spring even, and it could have been 98 as well. But I met up with those guys at a show, and Paul and Jeremy, they were Jeremy was the second guitarist at the time, and Paul's a guitar player that remains in there. And he gave me the demo, and he goes, "This is what we do. My drummer does this one-handed roll for the blast beat." And I was like, "Okay." And went home and listened to the demo, and wow, it blew me away. And so I called those guys, and I'm like, "Yay, let's just get together and see what happens." And they came out to my practice room at the time, which was where I was rehearsing with Possession. And at the time, Doug Williams was playing bass in Possession with me, so I brought him along to a practice once. I did, I think, 2 rehearsals with Origin, and then just didn't return any phone calls for some weird reason. I had met a girl, so there's the reason. So met this girl, started dating her, and we were talking about like Angel Corpse and Possession and all that. And she's like, "What happened to that band Origin you were talking about?" And so I'm like, "That's a good question." Called them back, and yeah, rest is history with that.
So that's a really incredibly long time for a band to be active. I mean, you guys still are active to this day. So I'm super curious, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, it's awesome. You guys are still making music together. What is it now that satisfies you? What do you find satisfying about playing music with them now?
That we didn't have to, and we probably never will. Well, we've made it a point of not being a band that breaks up and comes back and headlines the festival with an extra $5,000. I don't like that. So many of the early bands have done that. They've broken up, and and I talked to a lot of these guys at the end of their career the first time, and they weren't happy. They were very unhappy. They had done, 3 or 4 albums. They had run their course for, between, 5, 7, 10, 12 years. And I'm talking to these guys in these tiny venues in Kansas on a Tuesday night, and there's 20 people that show up, and, they're still doing it, but they're just kind of not very friendly, and they're just like mad about it. And then sure enough, the band breaks up, and the band breaks up for 5 or 6 years, and then they come back and they're headlining this festival, and they're making all this massive money, and they act like none of that had anything to do with the fact that you just broke up, disappeared for 5 years, came back, and we're happy that we've never had to do that.
So you find the integrity of it, or do you find it happy that you've never had those moments where you've just been over it? Or have you had those moments?
I have had those moments where I'm like, fuck this, fuck these guys, hell with this music, I don't like anybody, blah, 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 blah. But that's tour thought, man. That's waking up after 3 hours of sleep in a van, got to go and play a show. It's going to be for 30 people because it is a Tuesday night, and it is Dayton, Ohio, and it's a deposit night, la 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 la, and all this kind of stuff. So you have those nights, and then you get online and you make a big mistake by doing what we call an ego search. And you look up your band, and some dude wrote on a message board, "Yeah, I met Longstreth. He's an asshole." I'm like, wait a minute. I met that guy in Dayton on a Tuesday night when I had 2 hours of sleep on me, and, my girlfriend had just broken up with me. Fucking, yeah, wow. So, a lot of that. But the point is never make a life decision in those kind of surroundings. So, yeah, all 4 of us have done that. And some of us didn't come back. But like the band that we have now is it's Paul, our guitar player, myself, our bass player Mike, and our vocalist Jason. Jason joined in 2011 or 12, and that was when the band became stable. Was that lineup right there? And we've been stable ever since. We still bicker at each other like crotchety old idiots, but the lineup is solid. And I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of integrity going on there. We are happy that we haven't ever had to use much of a gimmick. You know, there's no costumes, there's no makeup, there's not an outfit, there's just the fact that we get on stage and we play the kind of death metal that we play, and it's fun. It's like we're like aggressively happy.
Do you find that you guys do you find that when you write new music that do you find yourself saying, gee, we've never done anything like that before? And it's like pleasantly surprising that after all this time, you're still covering new territory?
Yeah, actually, we did a song off the last record called Invariance Under Transformation, which was one of the songs I did for the Meinl playthrough. And I love that song because it's the only slow song we've ever done. The guys aren't particularly crazy about playing it live because when we play that song live, people don't tend to move very much. And I think my guys are a little... It kind of racks their nerves if they feel like they're getting stared at. So, unfortunately, we don't play that song very often. But you know, approximately half of the band love that song for what it is. It's like out of nowhere, Paul just wrote this slow thing, and 2 albums ago we did a straight up like D-beat grindcore song that, you know, sounds a lot like Suffer the Children from Napalm Death. That was interesting. And album before that, Paul wrote a straight-up black metal song. So, yeah, we're always doing these weird little things with it and kind of surprising ourselves. It keeps it fresh. Yeah.
Well, no, that's super cool. Okay, I want to get this question out of the way. And this question is only for the benefit of listeners who may not have read the answer to this before via someone who's educated and discusses it on the comment section on YouTube or whatever. So you use triggers, you use them on your kick drums for sure, or kick drum. And do you ever use them on your snare?
I experimented with that, but it's awful. I hated it.
You mean on your snare?
On my snare, yeah.
Okay, so my question is this. You use them on your kick, but despite the fact that you've discussed this until you're blue in the face, can you please do me a favor, do me a solid, and at least for our Meinl Radio listeners, tell me one more time about your use of triggers and why using triggers is not what the uneducated masses calls cheating.
Hey, tell me, can you hear this? Can you hear this?
Kind of, barely.
Never mind. Triggers for the... Okay, well... I mean, they were using triggers back in the 70s during the disco era, I think. But... I use a trigger on my kick drum because as far as death metal is concerned... knowing or unknowing, I don't think people really want to hear bass drums. I think they want to hear machine guns. So, you know, the kick drum in death metal is a lead instrument. It's a lead and a rhythm instrument. So that's one of the things that was really, really kind of like, you can blame Morbid Angel and Death on that. Because, you know, Death Human and probably Morbid Angel Covenant is really where it was like all of a sudden this bass drum stuff is a science and it is to be heard, and it's how we're going to judge death metal bands for quite a while until nobody really cares anymore because it's happening all the time. So it was always important that you could hear the kick drums and you could hear them as clearly as you could hear the vocals. And so what you ended up with was what became commonly known as the Scott Burns production, because Scott Burns down at Morrisound in the end of the 80s and up to the mid-90s or so, late 90s, was doing these productions that were really separated sounding. You could hear everything, and it was really interesting because it it furthered that thing that originally attracted me to Cynic, was that you could hear what all these guys are doing. So Morris Sound was actually utilizing, they were triggering without the, it was interesting how they were triggering, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were putting triggers on the kick drums and running that line into the board, but they would have to go into this computer and they would have to go into the coding of it, and they would have to find the triggers in the binary coding of it and highlight that somehow. It was really crazy early computer science that the Morris brothers were doing. But as far as I use triggers. It's because in death metal, there's you're playing machine guns more or less. Did I answer the question right, or do you need more?
Kind of. I mean, I understand you're trying to get this this sound that was achieved by these guys that were pioneering on these albums, like Death and Morbid Angel. So there was this sound that was coming up, this separation of sound. And I imagine what you're talking about. Like for me, I would think that where you're not hearing this separation of sound and you can't tell exactly what's going on is like if you think about older metal songs, like say on Slayer's Raining Blood, or you think about like Megadeth's The Conjuring or Black Friday when Gar's playing double bass. The sound of the double bass on those songs is kind of like almost implied rather than explicitly heard. It's more of just like this thing that goes on underneath. Whereas with the records you're talking about, you can hear this serious separation. So you're playing triggers in order to give people what they want sonically. But you'll have some people that say, that's cheating, man, that's cheating. But the way that I see it is that in order to activate those triggers, you have to be able to do it, technically speaking. So, do you see what I mean?
Anybody that says triggers are cheating, they just don't know what they're talking about. And I know that sounds really crass. That's a hard thing to say. It's not meant to be uncouth or I'm not trying to be a jerk, but if you say triggers are cheating because you hear a lot of notes happening at once and you just assume that it's not possible for the human being to do that, then it's like, well, yeah, you can do that. Nowadays, you can put a program in, you can stick an MP3 in your trigger module and you can hit it and it becomes and then all of a sudden it's a sampler. But, yeah, it's just like a lot of people just want to call it cheating because it's you're not going through all the rigmarole it requires to put a microphone in a kick drum, tune the kick drum perfectly, go to hire a sound man to make sure, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to get that, what do you want to say, like the Binge and Purge Metallica box set live kick drum sound that I thought was a trigger, but apparently was not. And I'm like, wow, that sound is amazing. So what we used to do is it started like on a local level. It started as a means to an end because the sound guy was never going to be able to do this for you. So you just plug a trigger module into your kick drums and he's got a perfect sounding kick drum. It makes it easier. So engineers love triggers. As far as like, but you're right. You have to be. It's kind of like the drummer doesn't get the opportunity to hide behind distortion and reverb and all that. The drummer has to be on, and the drummer has to be even more on if you make him play triggers, because all of a sudden your kick drum notes are extremely audible and they're right out there in the middle of the floor and everybody can hear it. It's kind of like being naked on stage. So you better be on your game. You can either hear how good a guy is or you can hear how bad a guy is. Way back when, you'd hear a lot of dudes that would just get a trigger module, wire it up, have a couple of weeks worth of band practice and then get on stage and you felt bad for the guy. But, you're just like, you're sharpening and spiking the note and putting it out there so everybody can hear it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I imagined. I would think that if you sucked, triggers are not going to help you not suck. I think it's going to exacerbate and amplify, make the situation worse. It's going to really show everybody your inadequacies. So, because you've got to have that trigger dialed in correctly. You don't want it to misfire, because if it misfires, if it's too sensitive, well, then it's not going to be it's going to be maybe playing a kick drum when there shouldn't be one.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it dialed in enough, you're going to be missing what you're doing. So having it dialed in just right doesn't make you a drummer that you're not. It just shows exactly the drummer that you are, I would think. In order to activate it and not have it misfire, you've got to be doing just what you would do even without the trigger. Just now, like you said, you're just giving the sound man what he needs without having to hope that he's got the 2 microphones and the 2 kick drums, or the 1 mic and the 1 kick with the double pedal. Everything's mic'd up just right. It's just kind of a no-brainer situation, right?
Absolutely. And, it's really funny because there was something that went down a couple of months ago online where all of the guitar players started mashing each other over not playing.
Dude,
not actually playing what they're playing. And that was really funny. Sorry?
Yeah. No. I don't mean to cut you off, but for people that don't know, I think it started with the one YouTuber, Jared Dines, and he was calling people out for being fake, guitar playing being fake, like it wasn't as fast as people were saying. And then it was the dude from Rings of Saturn that did a counter video, and he really he was polite and he was kind and he was very thorough, and he did an explanation as to why it actually wasn't fake. And is this what you're talking about?
Sort of. I can't really speak for who said what. I mean, I know a couple of the guys that were in that thing, but I mean, we saw it happening. We've been watching it go down for a while now, and like back in the 90s, when dudes were plugging a DM5 or a Alesis D4 DM5, and you had your big red Clavia D drum triggers, and those machines didn't have the ability to do what kids are doing today with things. We toured with a band at one point in time that was using a lot of backing tracks. And my friend, who was an engineer, he was standing on the side of the stage, and he could see they had the DAW open as they were playing all the backing tracks through a digital audio workstation. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Look at track number 7. I go, "What's track number 7? It's a kick track." So dude had all of his kick tracks in there as a backing track. And I think what was happening was the engineer was at front of house, and he had, because the drummer knew how to play. He knows how to play, and he had his triggers. I'd watch him set up and all that stuff, and I'd watch him test the triggers, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure the engineer had both lines in case dude was off on a night, so he could bring up the fake triggers. So it's funny that it's actually happening more nowadays than it was back then.
Huh.
With the advent of, because they have these XFX units, you can loop and you can put in pre-played stuff, and then you have MacBooks on stage, and you have digital audio workstations on stage and all this stuff, and there's a lot more miming going on. There's a lot more like pop sense miming going on in death metal today than there ever was back in the old days, I believe. And that's what gave rise to that hysterical guitar flame out, where all of us drummers that have been in the game for a while just kind of sat back and got our popcorn and just watched it go off, and it was glorious.
Yeah, I bet it was.
Because guitar players, come on, man. You're the loudest people in the band. You're the guitar player, so you're the main melodic component, and you are going to stand in front of your wall of amplifiers. You're going to hit your guitar, and you're going to look at me and give me the stink eye because you can't hear natural snare drum. Go to hell.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I love my guitar players. But
So I'm curious, has there ever been a golden era for death metal?
I think you had that first golden era where like the first 2 or 3 records were coming out from the first bands, like, Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Deicide, Carcass, Napalm Death, they were all putting out their first, 3 and 4 records, and that was like the real golden era of death metal. By the time we got into the mid-90s, even the later 90s, like when I kind of came on, I think you were starting to witness, I think it was dying in the mid-90s. It was still there, but like the early 90s is when Deicide was putting out like the first, like Deicide Legion is a legendary record. Legion, Morbid Angel, like the first 3 Morbid Angel records, Cannibal Corpse's first 3 records. Cannibal Corpse had put out Vile, Morbid Angel had put out Covenant, and Deicide had put out Once Upon the Cross, and those were all like the last album. Well, no, Morbid Angel, you got to give maybe like Domination. So yeah, mid-90s was the height. Right in the mid-90s, it definitely peaks, and it starts to come down, and it's saved by black metal. So, and then black metal kind of takes us through the later 90s into the 2000s, I imagine. But yeah, and a lot of those bands, like we went on a Deicide tour last spring, and we weren't really expecting much because Deicide had been around for a long time. They've had a lot of lineup changes, didn't quite represent what they used to be, and it's just old Deicide. But we got out there, and my God, they kill it every night on stage. They are obviously seasoned pros that haven't stopped. They've kept going and kept going and kept going, and the crowds are coming out, and young kids too. I think partially it's definitely coming back. A lot of the older bands are getting a lot of respect these days because people are aware that there is a lot of backing tracks on stage and there's a lot of fakery going on. And I think that's just going to be a natural circle of things. Is like it's going to come back around that people are going to want to hear something that you can't argue is real.
Yeah,
that's a long way of saying, yeah, death metal definitely peaked at first in the mid-90s, and I don't know where the other peak was, but man, there's been so many like brilliant records from those bands that if you just look at all the killer records from like 95 up until now, you wouldn't even recognize that it's not that popular. But I think it's a lot more accepted now. So yeah, there's that.
Was it when Cannibal Corpse was on Ace Ventura: Pet Detective when it became mainstream?
I don't know about that. I mean, that was definitely. What year was that movie?
I'm kidding. I'm being sarcastic.
Oh, okay. I can't see you.
No, I know. It was Pet Detective. It was Ace Ventura that they were in that movie, right?
Yeah, and that's not even what. I mean, it helped them, but like Cannibal Corpse. Here's a funny, interesting thing about Cannibal Corpse is 2 winters ago. I think it was 2 winters ago. Maybe it was just last winter. I don't even remember. But I did my first tour playing drums for Hate Eternal, and I got to witness what Cannibal Corpse is today because we were doing main support for them. And I had seen plenty of Cannibal Corpse shows, but actually getting to watch those guys and watch how they do it, and that is the most professional death metal band in existence, period. You don't get like they work harder, they're more professional, they're super nice. They're thankful for what they have, and they don't fuck up live. And it's hysterical because they walk up on stage with the lights off, they pick up their guitars, they hit an open note, and they turn around and they face the front of the stage, and Paul throws a 4 count, and they just start playing. And it's like they don't do anything special, they just do what they do. They do what they invented, and nobody measures up to that band live. It's unheard of.
Here's a random question. I suppose I could ask you this after the podcast, but I'll ask it now. Did you ever listen to Pestilence?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Dude,
Testimony of the Ancients was the album that I was into.
There was a record that got me into them. I don't even know how you pronounce it. I think it's in Latin. It's Malleus Maleficarum or something like that.
Yes.
Dude, they had this song on there called Bacterial Surgery that used to just make me lose my mind with a buddy. Like, I had this one bandmate who turned me on to them, and he would do this thing where we would go back to his house late at night and he would drive down these windy country roads and he'd turn his lights off and he'd headbang to that song, and it would scare the shit out of me because I thought we were going to die any moment. But it made an impression on me because that music was insane. That band, there was something about them that I totally dug.
Well, I mean, they were a killer band. They were one of the Consuming Impulse, was that I think it was Consuming Impulse and yes, yeah, Testimony were the ones that I was into, but they were kind of right there along the lines of like Death and Cynic and Atheist. They were a little more dingy. They were a little more, gritty. But
yeah,
definitely killer band. I mean, Pat's still out there doing it, so.
So let's see. I'm also curious. You had mentioned this earlier. Tell me about your involvement with Jiu Jitsu.
Well, my involvement with Jiu Jitsu, it's rooted in death metal, believe it or not. So I did Taekwondo as a kid for a while, and that kind of came and went. And I met two individuals that were both death metal musicians. The first one was the original vocalist of Origin, Mark Manning, I think he was pretty new at Jiu-Jitsu at that point. So it was interesting listening to him talk about it. I didn't even know what it was at that point in time. And then I met Joseph Capizzi, who was at the time he playing guitar for a band called The Dying Light. We're getting into some subterranean stuff here. Fantastic drummer in that band, by the way, Brandon Thomas. And I remember walking up to Joe Capizzi and going, "So you practice ninjutsu, right?" And he goes, "No, jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu." And I was like, "Oh." He goes, "Yeah, it's kind of an offshoot of judo, and it's ground grappling." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And that was 2001. And I always knew that I wanted to get back into martial arts, and my boss, Greg, was like, "Yeah, go down and check out that jiu-jitsu place around the corner." I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Didn't do it. Went on tour. Played Skyrim for 3 months straight. Put on 20 pounds, 30 pounds. Went on tour for a month, came back home, and started up Skyrim again. And I said, "You know what? Maybe I should call that jiu-jitsu guy down the street." So I went down there and I saw it, and I watched a class, and we started talking about what we do and all that. And I'm like, "I'm a metal drummer, blah, blah, blah," and all that. And he goes, "Oh, cool. Are you aware of this band and that band and that band and that band?" And he like rattles off a bunch of bands and musicians that I knew in that area, Saratoga Springs. I'm like, "All right, sold. I'm in." And that's kind of what happened. I got in there. I took one class, decided I'm staying here, cut my hair the next day, and went on doing jiu-jitsu for like the next 6-8 years, I think. Yeah. And that almost eclipsed my playing for a while. But it taught me a lot of things about, it teaches you a lot about your body. It teaches you a lot about your ego. That's the big dig you get, is you walk into a jiu-jitsu class and you really realize really quickly that you are not and never will be the baddest guy in the room. And not that I ever thought that, but it definitely finds those little pieces of your psyche and messes with them. So
I don't need to take jiu-jitsu because I already know that I'm not the baddest guy in the room.
I never thought I was the baddest guy in the room either, but
I'm
I also never thought that I could be. I mean, I'm pretty good at this stuff. I'm pretty healthy. I can play drums well. I know how to talk to people. Oh, wait a minute. I am really, really bad at this. Holy cow. And it was really interesting. It showed me a lot of parallels, like how to engage your core. So that ended up helping with playing drums a lot, and just like understanding how really fast things look when you are doing these really fast things. So you're navigating what's going on in between the seconds, and it's pretty cool to see like when your consciousness kind of goes away and you just kind of get into this flow. and time just slows down, and it's really, really cool. So kind of almost go into a meditative type state.
I would say you learned a lot more about economy of motion.
Absolutely. And I'm not even really doing jiu-jitsu so much anymore. I've kind of moved over into Muay Thai lately, just because as much as I love jiu-jitsu, it's kind of scary because, like, I think any musician that does jiu-jitsu, they come to a point where they have to pick one or the other, and I can't, in good consciousness, I can't risk breaking my wrist like a week before a tour. That's just bad idea. And I've come really close. So after a while, I think a lot of it had to do with relocating to New York City and just having my entire life change, that I just kind of started to gravitate more towards Muay Thai, because it's not as I'm not going to be sparring as much in Muay Thai, and I'm not going to, because I'm new to it. So I'm somewhat advanced in jiu-jitsu. I'm extremely new in Muay Thai, so I don't have to worry about getting into any really dangerous encounters, which is what could have happened a couple of times. I remember a couple of times where I just like, whoa, that was really, really, really close. I mean, none of it was aggressive and pissed off, but there was just a couple of rolls that happened where I was just like, that could have gone really bad really easily. So I miss jiu-jitsu. I mean, when the time comes that I don't have a lot of tours happening, I will definitely get back on the mats. But while the bands are active, I think I'm probably going to stick with Muay Thai and not hurt just keep the risk off a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Question from someone on the outside: did you ever find yourself having to use what you learned?
Not really. No. Well, I guess there was one situation on tour where a guy was really, really drunk and getting kind of aggressive, and I didn't choke him or anything, but I definitely kind of was able to get my arms around him and kind of like chat with him for a little bit and cool him down. But there was no real technical jiu-jitsu happening there, but there was definitely some jiu-jitsu thought happening there. Made sure I was kind of like on the dude's side. I just kind of wrapped my arms around his arms, kind of planted him, knew where my feet were planted, had my grip right, and kind of put my head where I wouldn't get hurt. And I was just like, hey, calm down. It's okay. And that was really the extent of it. But other than that, it helps with a lot of things that aren't directly fight-based.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sure. I was thinking when it came down to its most absolutely practical application, I wondered if you'd ever had to use it. And I am not surprised in the least that you segued and you answered that question by starting out, yeah, there was this really drunk guy. I mean, God, of course it was a really drunk guy.
I wish that more bouncers and like people that are in that line of work, I wish they understood the concept of jiu-jitsu more than how to break someone's shoulder. Because the thing with jiu-jitsu, the thing that has to come first with jiu-jitsu is you're putting water on the flames. You're calming things down. The idea is that you're going to stop somebody, you're going to talk them down, and you're going to let them go, and everything's going to be fine. That's the A game in jiu-jitsu, as far as I'm concerned. Actually, the A game is that you're going to talk to somebody, because it's such a mental game too. Is that you're not going to clash words with a dude that's totally fired up. You need to be pragmatic. You need to learn how to talk with the guy. So that there in itself is jiu-jitsu too. You're not just clashing with somebody. You're working around and you're circling and you're finding an in so you can calm the situation down.
Yeah, I totally get that. Now, another subject completely. You've been teaching at the Collective in New York City for some time. How did that come about, and what's that experience been like for you?
I'm actually not. Well, yeah, I am on the faculty now. I have yet to get into an actual. I mean, I'm on the faculty and I'm teaching some private lessons. I have yet to do an actual course there, but that's in the cards. I I was on tour with Origin. We were doing Summer Slaughter. This is, I want to say this is 2017. And the restaurant I was working at closed down. And I was at this cute little gastro pub in Queens for about 2 years. And they were having issues. And when I'd go on tour and I'd come back and they'd be happy to have me. And it was killer. And I got a phone call halfway through that tour, and they're like, "Hey, we're closing our doors. Just want to let you know, you have a paycheck and blah blah blah." Start, all that. If we reopen down the line, we're going to call you and all that. So it was nice, but I knew that I was going to come home and have no money, so I put up a Facebook post, and I was saying, no employment for September. Hit me up for drum work. And Tony Maggiolino, who ends up becoming one of my favorite people ever, he calls me up and he goes, "Hey, come work at the Collective." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to, but I tour." And he goes, "Yeah, that's the point. You tour, you're a musician. We got Chris Amott here. He does the same. Come on in, let's talk." And so I credit Tony for kind of saving my existence in New York City, giving me this job. And it was just kind of one of those things where, the school, when I joined that school, they were in such a, they were doing a lot of code stuff. They were getting the building up to code. They were entering the accreditation phase of how to get the school to be an accredited school. So I was seeing a lot of this stuff happen. I was seeing a lot of, building permit stuff happening. They got to redo the whole fire system, and I'm just kind of watching all this go down. And in the meantime, I'm a tech there. I'm a studio manager, so I'm setting up the rooms. I'm making sure the gear works, and I'm scrubbing the toilets. And, yeah, Tony just starts floating the idea. He goes, you want to get your teacher's license so you can start teaching here. And that's the long game of it. And, I mean, you were there. You and I met Tony. I hung out with Tony on I think the same day that I hung out with you for the first time.
At the Collective?
No, at NAMM. And it was really funny. It was really funny because you and I actually met in New York City, I think.
At a Summer Slaughter.
Yeah, old Summer Slaughter. And then I want to say maybe 2 years after that or a year after that, because I went to the NAMM convention in 2009 or 10. I think it was 2010. And I was hanging out with our mutual buddy Mike Heller, and he's like, "This is Tony Maggiolino. You got to talk to him." And so hanging out with Tony, and he's very obviously a metalhead, and we're getting along real well and all that stuff. And that night, that day, I came over and talked to you because I was sad about the other company, and we had a great conversation. And then that night, we all got drinking, and then Tony, 9 shots of Jack Daniels and 4 beers, whatever. And then you came walking around the corner. And all I remember was the look on your face, and it was really funny. And you hung out for maybe 30 seconds, and Tony was really drunk, and he's patting you on the shoulder, and he's like, "You guys got to get together, blah, 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 blah." And then you took off, and I'm like, this sinking feeling in my gut. I'm like, oh, no. I just met this. I think I sealed the deal with Meinl, but now I just totally botched it because I am completely drunk. And, yeah, that was pretty funny.
Dude, you guys were in good spirits, man. If I had a look on my face, maybe I had to go take a whiz or something, and I was uncomfortable. It wasn't you for sure. You guys were in good spirits. I mean, there's a difference between dudes that have been drinking and maybe they're a little sloppy, but they're still fun. There's nothing wrong with that. And then there's a guy that I remember going upstairs, and it was the Anaheim Hilton. Yeah, it was the Hilton at NAMM, and there was a show upstairs, and I was going up there, and I bumped into this one dude, and he had been trying to get on the roster for some time, and it just wasn't working out for a number of reasons. And he'd been drinking, and he shot me this look. It was one of those kind of looks, and he looks at me and he goes, "Why do you not like me?" And I'm like, "Oh God." Yeah, no. So you weren't like that at all. You were quite the opposite. I mean, here we are, dude. We're hanging. We're working together. We get along great. Like, everything's cool. So obviously you did not blow it.
And that's been my pleasure. But yeah, that night was particularly funny because I know Chris Penny was there, and I that was like a side of Chris Penny I had never seen before. It was hysterical. But that night I ended up going up to a hotel room with Derek Roddy and Jason Bittner and their respective wives. And I remember being one of the wives, like, holding me by the shoulders, looking at me, and directing me towards the door. So I woke up the next morning. I was like, oh, my God, I did something stupid. I pissed off somebody and blah, 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 blah. And I went up to Derek. I was like, what happened last night? And he goes, dude, that was amazing. I go, what did I do? Apparently, I was trying to leave. I was just gone drunk, but apparently I was okay. But I opened the door. I pulled the door open and clocked myself in the head with the door.
Ooh.
And I knocked myself across the room. I go reeling across the room, and I think it was Haley, caught me by the shoulders, and she goes, holy shit, are you okay? And I'm like, I gotta go. And she's like, you need to sit down, relax. I'm like, no, I gotta go. And she directed me towards the door, and I went blasting down the hallway, and I think I buzzed Alex Webster from Cannibal Corpse. I just ran up on him. Hey, man, what's going on? Just super drunk, blah, 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 blah. And then my buddy, my driver, just appeared out of nowhere and put me in the car and took me back to the hotel, and that was that. That's the end of that night.
Your impersonation of Derek was, like, spot on perfect.
Hey, man, Derek Roddy, man, how you doing? What's up, fucker?
Man, I got... Yeah, that's it. That's him right there. So, dude, I got one more question for you. Like, it could be after we hang up the phone, or it could be 6 months from now, or whatever. I would say right now you don't really know what might be 6 months from now because of all the horse hockey that's going on. But what's next for you?
Well, what I hope is next for me is everything that's going on right now is it sucks for a lot of people, and it's wonderful for a lot of people, and I think it's both in varying degrees for everybody. But what I have happening is I'm becoming more. I'm teaching more for the collective online. Anybody that wants to sign up and do my free half an hour and warm up class at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, go to the website, click on the red button. I'm also experimenting. I'm experimenting with my recording gear a lot more, video editing. So what I want to do, I've already been talking to a couple of bands about this, is I want to make sure that as soon as I get back to my practice room, where that brand new Pearl kit is sitting, is hysterical. I got that thing a week. I set it up a week later. We're in quarantine.
That's brutal.
Yeah. I set it up. I got it. And I went on tour with my reference kit, which lives in Kansas, and the idea was to swap those kits out mid-tour. So, yeah, that we were on tour for 4 days. We got called off the road, went home. That kit's sitting there. I had 2 days to play it, and then they lock everything down. They close the studios. So my plan is to do a lot more recording from home. Like, obviously I'm not going to have super top-of-the-line professional sounding stuff at the moment, but I will definitely be able to work drum tracks for people that need that. Kind of want to experiment with streaming practice sessions. Maybe on Twitch or something. Aside from that, there's going to be an Origin record. Paul's starting to write, and there's going to be a Hate Eternal record pretty soon. Not pretty soon. There's going to be the starting of these albums' writing processes is going to happen hopefully sooner than later once quarantine's lifted.
Nice, dude. Super cool.
So a lot. I'm looking at this whole thing. This whole quarantine thing for me is. The apocalypse. We're in the apocalypse. The world has ended, and we get another shot at it. So I am stockpiling. I am looking at all these little things I used to talk about doing, and I'm finally doing them. I'm approaching new techniques. I'm approaching new parts of being a drummer and being an online musician, and I want to take these new skills into the new world with us, then hopefully be a better musician on the other end of it.
It's all you can ask for, man. That's awesome. I'm glad it's been a good reset for you.
It has had its share of freakouts,
Yeah, it's had that for everybody.
But yeah.
That's the way it works. Dude, John, man, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast and taking your time to chat with us. And it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's all mine, man. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.